Hello, everyone. My name is Manolo Concepcion. I am the new associate head coach at Eastern Illinois University. I am born and raised in Toa Baja, Puerto Rico, where I went to high school as well and did my first year of college. I later transferred to the U.S., played for a year in the NCAA, and then basically started coaching right after that. I've been involved in youth development in Puerto Rico, as well as in the pro league in men's and women's in Puerto Rico, helping rebuild two programs there. And then I have transferred to the U.S., where I have been a junior college coach and an NCAA Division I coach. Throughout this crisis, one of the things that I wanted to establish was making sure that volleyball, doesn't go doesn't go forgotten. And what we're trying to establish is a basis of unification around the world, where we can talk volleyball with people from different communities, where we can learn from their experiences and backgrounds, and basically continue to grow the game, and continue to get better throughout this pandemic. Maybe provide a little hope and happiness to people as well, while we figure out what we're going to do from now on. So today, I'm honored and privileged to have one of the best coaches that has ever coached in the U.S., Mr. Jim Stone. Jim Stone, how are you doing today?
I am wonderful. I'm doing as well as we're all doing in these interesting times.
Oh, I get it. And, I want to go through a very, very basic bio of Mr. Jim Stone. Please keep in mind that he has been involved in volleyballs as a player or coach since the 70s. So I'm going to try to summarize this as best as possible. He is a USAV all-time great coach. He is an the Ohio State University Hall of Fame coach. He has been involved in USA volleyball forever. Let's put it that way. He has been in the senior national team, junior national team, youth national team. He's the head coach of the youth national team. He has developed many of the players are today in the senior national team. Because of him, youth development continues to grow in the U.S. Probably one of the best situations for youth development in the world because of someone like Jim Stone. So again, I'm really honored to have you today. Jim, did I miss anything with what I said?
Well, when you said it started in the 70s, it means I'm a pretty old guy right now.
I must say as well that Jim is also, now that I see his shirt, he also helps Art of Coaching, which is one of the companies that helps develops and spread the word about volleyball, not just in the U.S. but internationally as well. As here. Hey Jim, what are you doing throughout this pandemic? What keeps you busy right now?
Well, like you said, I'm doing a lot of content work for the Art of Coaching, and like a lot of sources, somewhat similar to what you're doing. We're trying to fill the void of providing quality information for coaches, and sometimes, especially collegiate coaches, but club coaches this time of year, I mean, they're going 10 different directions. The college coaches are finishing their spring training, they're recruiting, they're planning for the summer activities and fall activities, and the club coaches are preparing for national championships. So the unintended consequence of this virus situation is people have a little bit more free time that they can devote to becoming, more knowledgeable coaches, or listening to other coaches talk about what they do. And I think that's kind of a weakness in our how we go about it, is people are so busy with their own programs, is there's hardly enough hours in the day to just grow as a coach. So
I totally agree. I think that it's this is an opportunity, that just happened because of a crisis, that has allowed us to take some time to basically establish continuing education, and that has been very, very beneficial. Having people like you that continue to educate the world through the eyes of what you have seen, throughout your long career.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do now with the Art of Coaching is bring coaches together from a myriad of backgrounds, club coaches and college coaches, with the idea of just kicking around ideas and without right or wrong being part of the equation. Is just, what do you do, why do you do it, and hopefully it'll foster some creative thinking on the part of the people who might be listening, with the idea of, I've never heard it phrased that way, or I've never done it that way, maybe I should give it a try. So I think this entire sequence of events, it almost gives coaches a chance to take a step back and pause for a second and evaluate, what am I doing, and why am I doing it this way? And, this coach does it different, or that coach does it different. Maybe I can try it myself and see how it works.
And while we're talking about that, I invite everyone to check out Art of Coaching. You can find it in the website. For anyone that is listening around the world, they have many, many, many opportunities of learning, from drills to conferences to actually live certifications, a lot of stuff with really good coaches. And speaking of that, Jim, one of your colleagues from Art of Coaching, Mr. Ross Rhodes, was in this program, a couple of weeks back, and we were talking, and it strikes me the same way as you strike me from the distance, is that you guys are just obsessed with learning. You're obsessed with getting better, and I think that's what makes a master coach long term. Can you tell me a little bit about the mastery of learning, and why is it so important to you? You already have a famer. You already achieve, a lot of things in every level. Why you continue to be wanting, and hungry for learning and gaining new knowledge?
Well, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Russ. Russ is, I don't know, I've lost track how many national championships he's won, but
Seven.
And I think the easy thing to do would be, well, Russ has good players. And that it goes without saying he's had good players, but what people don't know about Russ, and Russ and I have known each other for 40 years, so I might have a little bit more of an insight. What people don't realize about Russ is how hard he works at every aspect of what he's doing, and for that I respect him tremendously, because he works very hard, and because he works very hard, he has good teams. It's not the other way around, so he was a great coach before he ever won his first national championship, and he went about it the same way.
Agreed.
But, I mean, for me, it's just kind of an intellectual curiosity of, is there a better way to do things? And I think, what fostered it in me was when I retired from Ohio State and started coaching the youth national team. And I was able to kind of, truck around the world and see other systems, other coaches do things in a different way. And I tell everybody that if I went back to Ohio State today, I would do it completely different. It's like, you don't know what you don't know until you kind of get out of that cocoon that you're in and see how it's done other places. So it's been a great learning opportunity for me to do the youth national team and to go to world championships and spend time talking with coaches from various parts of the world, or watch them train their teams. So I think more than anything, that's really been kind of the springboard for all that I've learned in recent years from watching other coaches coach, and then trying to spread it as the best way I can.
I love how also you have a high emphasis on movement. For you, movement and reading, are huge parts of the game. You help people see what you see, and you help people teach what you see to the players. Can you tell me a little bit about why the concept of motor learning, and the concept of reading are so important to you? Why are they so relevant in volleyball today?
Well, relative to movement, I'll explain it this way. If you look at our game, and if you watch 5 minutes of video and go, okay, what did you just see? I mean, you saw players running forward, backward, sideways, shuffle stepping. You've seen them jumping. You've seen them kind of move in the air when they're hitting or blocking. And then the skill of landing, which I think as coaches, we really ignore. You see high postures, you see low postures. I mean, you see all these things, throwing for sure, tracking a ball that's coming at you. Just these basic movement or motor learning activities. I should say motor activities.
Mm-hmm.
That I think sometimes as coaches, we just assume that players are doing correctly. But if you walk into any club, especially with the young ones, the 11s and 12s, and you just watch them run, and I mean they're all over the place, and they're just not running correctly, but we don't teach them how to run. But if you can't run well, you're going to have a hard time moving to the outside to block. You're going to have a hard time with a hitting approach. Because those are running activities. So I just think these core movements that we need to be teaching the 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds are really, really important. And sometimes I think we don't pay enough attention to them. Now you can teach those things inside of a practice or a drill, like, run and catch this ball if I'm working with a 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, next time, I don't want you to run like this. I want you to use your, so you can kind of teach it inside of a practice and keep it semi-game related. But I think the idea of teaching them to run and jump and land, I think is pretty important stuff.
The ABCs, agility, balance, coordination. So you're talking about how in those ages are not well taught right now. Has it always been that way, Jim? Or where did we get lost with this? Like, what happened?
Well, I think it's not so much the fault of the coaches. I think it used to be back, you said in the 70s when I was starting, people would play other sports.
Yeah.
And now there's so many, especially from the female side, there's so many that they just play volleyball. So they never learn some of these other movements that they would if they played a little bit of basketball or softball or played tag. I mean, it doesn't have to be this high level stuff, but I think they've gotten so locked in on volleyball. But be that as it is, I think the responsibility becomes the volleyball coach's responsibility to teach them some of these things that they used to pick up naturally. No one taught me a correct arm swing to hit a volleyball, but I played baseball when I was growing up, and I played tennis. So you were incorporating that throwing motion. So when I started playing volleyball, which wasn't until college, well, that was just a natural move, So I think the more we can get these younger kids playing other sports, or if not playing other sports, teaching them different movements inside of the volleyball practice, I think would help these young players out a lot.
Oh, the people are listening to this and talk about like skills are specific to the task. Why is it so important to have a background of playing other sports, or like you say, just doing other activities? Like if I get better at playing volleyball by playing more volleyball, like why is it so important right now to have that if those skills are specific?
Oh, is that a question?
Yes.
Well, I generally feel that there's transfer from sport to sport. I mentioned earlier, no one taught me an arm swing. But the throwing mechanics in baseball, the serving mechanics in tennis, the overhead mechanics in badminton are in essence all throwing activities. Um, and I would say the same thing if I'm, I grew up playing basketball. Well, I wasn't the best defender in the world, but I know one of the things they wanted me to do was shuffle step when I was guarding somebody. So no one taught me to shuffle step on a volleyball court. So when I got behind, I already knew how to do this. I had done it in other venues. Um, so a lot of what we do is certainly specific to the game. And as I'm running practice, you want to make things as game-like as possible. But at the same time, I think movements are universal. I think they go from sport to sport to sport. Some of the best volleyball players I've seen, especially from the men's side, grew up playing soccer. Well, why is that? Why were they so good? But they learned to move on their feet, and they're balanced, and they can make off balance plays if they had to lunge out, because they had to do the same thing in soccer. So I'm a big believer of lots of activity. It doesn't even have to be I'm playing on my soccer team. One of my longtime volleyball associates, Steve Kolpus, used to be the national team coach of England, and he since, like yourself, has matriculated to the United States. And quite often in our training at Ohio State, he would have them doing soccer drills. And it was carnage on a court. I mean, they had no idea. But I thought there was value to that in terms of a ball's coming at them, and they had to stop it with their right foot and then pass it with their left foot, and they're on their toes the whole time. And I do think, unlike some, I do think that if I get good at a lot of these movements, it'll transfer onto the volleyball court. Then I can use those movements in more of a game-like situation. So often people say, well, reading is really important, and it is. But if you don't have, even if you read correctly, if you don't have the skill once you get there and you pass it into the bleachers someplace, you may have great reading skills, but you haven't learned how to pass.
One more question about movement, Jim. You talk about your emphasis on teaching athletes to understand that most of the game is played off the floor, so on the air. So what are things that you work on for this matter? Like, how can you get better? If I'm an athlete listening to you, if I'm a coach listening to you, how do you train an athlete to be good at not being on the ground, to be good at, when you're jumping, to be good at, in those unbalanced situations?
I used to have an assistant at Ohio State, Liang Yao, obviously from China. And he did a wonderful job with our team doing what you just described. These are college-age kids, but they were still awful at it because no one had ever presented it to them. Where he would start off small, piece of elastic 4 inches off the floor, and they would jump and do 90-degree turns, and they had to do it while he was clapping. So there's like a rhythm to everything. It's like a dance that they were doing. And then maybe 180-degree turns. And then they would, if I'm working with little kids now or with younger kids, to be able to jump and turn 90 degrees and throw a ball to my partner. So I think you learn how to do those movements by doing those movements. It doesn't necessarily have to be while I'm hitting a volleyball. You may graduate to that, and you may get to that point, and you want to certainly incorporate that into it. But I think you can start with a very scripted, here's how we move, here's how it feels. How do I turn 90 degrees to my left? And I used the analogy before, when you watch young kids run and they're just flailing all over the place, and you kind of have to teach them to be more streamlined and keep your elbows bent. Okay, well, let's do the same thing. I'm going to jump, and I'm going to do a 90-degree turn, and then land coming straight down. I can't be twisting while I'm landing, And I'm convinced, this is a little bit off topic, but I'm convinced one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that we have so many ACL injuries in women's volleyball is we haven't taught players how to land.
Yes.
There's a lot of rotation while they're landing and off balance on one leg. And now some of that's going to happen inside the game, and that's just part of being a good athlete. But sometimes my conviction is a percentage of our knee injuries would be reduced if we just taught kids to land on balance and knees over toes and but those are things I think we can do inside of just a warm-up activity. There could be a ball involved, but we can, as coaches, we can be paying attention to how my 12-year-old is landing. So when they're jumping and maybe hitting a ball over,
Yes.
You can say, okay, now I want you to freeze after you land. You know, just so they're developing a feel for, are my knees caving in? Well, that's not a good thing. You got to have knees over toes. So even though it's going to be kind of over the net type of thing, they can be thinking about specific aspects of a skill.
And, and speaking of that, it is proven also that, with matters of landing, the concept of getting a good torque without dropping the older shoulder, is crucial into the balance of landing. It's crucial into understanding, where you contact the ball also influences where you land and how you land. So I think that teaching players on the base, how to do those things are crucial to the protection and the prehabbing of what a good athlete could be like long-term.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, especially at the college level, you especially if you go on social media during the spring, you see all these videos of people throwing around heavy barbells and this and that, and I'm just like going, but are you teaching your kids to land? Because that will save more injuries than how strong they happen to be in a specific body part. So strength's important, but I think that the techniques is equally important.
And you're so right about that. Just the takeoff, the landing, acceleration, deceleration. I think that those are 4 factors are mostly, underrated in the game of volleyball into the protection of the athlete and the making of a healthy athlete, for a long term and for durability.
Yeah, you mentioned deceleration. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, in the concepts of when you have to go from slow to fast, but there are also concepts that you have to go from fast to slow. So especially when you're exploding for a crossover step as a blocker, you're going slow to fast, but when you're going to a landing, you have to slow it down. Mm-hmm. So how do you actually teach a player to actually slow down after such an athletic move? Just like you said in one of your articles, you have to allow the player to be athletic. Now, when you are athletic, how can you help the player slow down after that athletic move? I think is a big part of protecting our athletes and getting someone to have a good, durable career, whatever it is. If it is to high school, college, professionally, national team, I think it's huge.
Well, the reason I ask is I like seeing what's going on in other sports and see how it might apply to volleyball. And there's this company called Driveline Baseball. I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
Tell me about it.
They're taking, especially pitchers, but also they delve into hitting mechanics, but especially pitching mechanics. And they emphasize the importance of deceleration because they feel a lot of the arm troubles that pitchers have is they haven't learned how to decelerate their arm. They're throwing as hard as they can.
Yes.
But they haven't learned how to decelerate, or they don't have the strength to decelerate.
All right. And
that just transfers the forces on the connective tissue. And so they had, you can Google Driveline Baseball, and that you'll see some videos of players throwing a ball back behind them into a wall, a weighted ball. I was asking somebody, why do they do that? And he says, to develop the deceleration muscles. So they're trying the back of the shoulder, they're developing those because when you pitch, what slows your arm down is the back of the shoulder. So I think there's all sorts of things that that are out there that we haven't really dug into as volleyball coaches yet.
And I love that concept. And also, the concept of, we're speaking about shoulders, the concept of an actual rotation of an arm instead of going over a labrum to protect that injury. And then the follow through, that's where the deceleration occurs. So,
right.
Putting more emphasis in those matters could maybe protect people from getting so many shoulder surgeries. And Jim, so many surgeries in high school level.
Yeah.
Like there's some of these players that have 2 surgeries before getting into college. So I don't know. I think it's really, really worrisome. And it has to do a lot with what you're talking about. Like how much emphasis or non-emphasis on movement are we putting in? Are we taking this for granted, thinking that it was like before, like we were able to just like jump into trees. We were able to play outside 24/7. We're able to do other things that did not involve technology. We didn't have a beeper. We didn't have a cell phone. We didn't have any technology that would keep us at home except for a Nintendo occasionally, Atari. So I think that has changed how much emphasis now we need to put on those matters at higher levels. In comparison to before, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think especially with the younger players, I think there's a case to be made where there's some overuse injuries, no question about that, especially when it comes to jumping and landing. But I also think, especially with the shoulder injuries, a lot of it is mechanically related. Mm-hmm. They don't use their upper body to rotate. And they have a lot of this kind of back and forth rather than a throwing motion. So they haven't been taught the correct mechanics. Then that puts all the stresses just on a small part of the shoulder. They talk about the rotator cuff.
Yeah.
And the way it was explained to me that the rotator cuff is just a group of 4 very small muscles. They weren't designed to take the stresses that we're putting on. But if you throw correctly and you use your upper body, in essence, it takes the stresses off the rotator cuff and puts it onto the bigger muscle groups. Mm-hmm. I do a lot. I'm kind of a skill analysis freak, and
me too.
So I've done a lot of skill analysis of good attackers. And one of my favorite, she used to play for Southern Cal, is Samantha Bricio.
Yes.
Just in terms of her hitting mechanics. And I mean, she's had a million balls and she's mm-hmm. never had arm trouble because mm-hmm. she does it mechanically correct.
Yes.
So if you do things correctly, it's amazing what you can do without getting hurt.
And one of the things that I love about Samantha, for the Mexican star, is actually, it's funny, Jim. I don't know if it happened to you, but at least until 2007 or maybe 2008, I was teaching hitting with high elbow. I felt that was so important because I was taught that way. And then not knowing that actually increases the probability of an injury by 3 times. Yeah. And if you watch Samantha, low elbow, good rotation. Just like any pitcher, like a tennis player serving, a quarterback, it's all low elbow. It's nothing high elbow.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I love about Samantha is that she keeps that elbow really low before a full rotation, and that saves the rotator cuff from doing an unorthodox movement that might create a long-term injury.
Yeah, and I think more coaches than not teach the way that you used to teach. I keep hearing, get your elbow up, get your elbow up. And
get it up. Yep.
I cringe every time I hear it because the good attackers over a long period of time, generally they don't hit that way.
Yeah.
They go low elbow, then they rotate their elbow up. They don't get their elbow up right away.
I agree.
So yeah, I think part of the problem is, as coaches, we need to teach our game a little bit better.
Now, speaking of that, Jim, let's talk about feedback. What do you think you will change if you will go back to Ohio State days about your feedback methods? Like, what do you think that science have brought to you that you say, wow, you know, this has been game changing?
Most of when I was at Ohio State, sometimes I look back and I just kind of go, how stupid was I? You know, I did. That's one of the advantages of getting older. You look back and see all the mistakes that you made. Most of the feedback that I used at Ohio State was verbal. And that's the thing I would change the most is, like I said, I became kind of a video fanatic, and I would probably not talk as much in practice and show video of players and show video of here's what I want, here's what you're doing, and put them side by side so the players can see what they're doing versus, you know, the changes that we'd like to make. And I would do more asking of questions of players rather than telling them what they should be doing.
And I think that guided discovery, you know, has done that. Like it has provided us with an opportunity to understand that we learn more by just asking questions and by someone discovering their own answers throughout those questions, and us not interrupting that development process. Because, you know, like people say, under coaching is a lot better than over coaching. And I think that also I didn't understand that before, but I think that when time has passed, I have understand that even more and more.
Yeah. And the other thing I would do drastically different is traditionally everybody, when they start practice in August, it was 2 days. And you would, and I mean, back in Ohio, it's hot, right. It's humid.
Yes.
Oh, it is go, and you would just grind. But if I would do that now, well, I wouldn't do that now. To me, just one practice a day.
Yeah.
And
a lot of rest, Jim. A lot of rest, and getting those minds fresh. Maybe like increasing intensity, but then resting more often.
Rest. And more individual stuff.
Okay.
If to create a scenario, okay, we're going to practice as a team in the afternoon, but in the morning, okay, we're going to have Susie come in at this time and maybe do some video, or look at yesterday's practice in a video scenario, just one-on-one or with positions, because I think that's where some really valuable learning takes place when you're in small group or individual. Either on the court or off the court. So while you're resting, I mean, you can still be engaged mentally, or somebody could go out there and just in a low impact, we're going to pass 100 balls. Mm-hmm. And you're working on this part of it. Because I think if all we do is team practice, I think there's so many variables that sometimes the player doesn't get a chance to kind of do what we're doing. Just pause for a second. Okay, what am I doing here? And kind of get a feel for things and go a little bit slower. I think there's some value to that.
And I think that when players get to college, they're so much into the cognitive stage. Even when they think they know something, it's a shock. They're mentally shocked in that transition. So because of that extension of cognitive status, I think that, just like you said, we need to spend more time in the individual attention of the athlete and not assuming that they know. Because probably they don't. And if they do, because of that mental shock, while they acquire their emotional intelligence getting into college, it gets on the way. They're still trying to figure out this thing called independence. And then we go and present, this element that presents a lot of stress, pressure, a team scenario. So I think that we need to provide better opportunities and increase the surroundings of learning. So like before, I don't know about you, but before my early coaching days, it's in 2002, I will emphasize more of that. I'll try to create the same type of stress that a game will create. Now I want more favorable situations. Like I want music going on maybe at some point. I want them feeling good about what they're doing. I want them feeling confident. Just like many of the speakers that come to the program, they talk about how it's more important how the player feels about doing the skill than what we say. So developing that confidence, how do you see that part about developing the confidence of an athlete to buy into what you're saying?
Yeah, confidence. I mean, that's one of those things that it's hard to have a prescription for confidence. If you do this, it's guaranteed it's going to work. One of the things, this is going to be kind of a roundabout way to get to your question.
Go for it.
One of the things that we started doing with the youth national team that I never did at Ohio State is they would do journals and write down, how they feel about the team or themselves, their performance, a skill that they're struggling with. And now I'm at a point where I completely endorse that, because I think it really helps the coach kind of get an idea of what the player is confident in or lacking confidence in, and to work in a collaborative way to help that person, get to a point where making sure, I think sometimes a lack of confidence is tied into unrealistic expectations.
Yes.
And I think
sometimes so true.
Kind of dial it back a little bit. And but I think those are things that I, at least for the youth team, that I learned by what they wrote down in their journal. In terms of, I didn't know they were struggling with this, and so maybe if I know that, this person's really not happy with how they're passing, well, let's just get a little bit better tomorrow, rather than shooting for this, you need to be passing here or else you're not helping our team, is if we can get just a little bit better. And I think by going at maybe smaller increments of improvement, it'll help kind of the esteem and confidence of the player.
And I think
but that being said, I mean, the only way you get confident is by going out on the floor and doing something in a good way. But we want to make sure they're focusing on the right incremental improvements rather than going from A to Z in one practice just because the coach is yelling at me.
Something that helps with that, you talk about it. I invite everyone to visit Jim Stone Facebook page. That he has an amazing article, short, precise, and simple article. You guys should read it. And it's about the outcome versus player development. So the outcome type of stats versus just emphasizing on developing the player and giving that confidence to the player that the player is actually getting better. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And can you talk about Better Ball?
Well, it goes back to this a book I started reading. I mentioned, I'm interested in what's going on in other sports. And there's a book out now called The MVP Machine, which is a baseball book. And they talk about, starts with Moneyball and taking stats of what's going on the field. And the gist of it is, if you stop there, you can't be successful. You have to take that information and then use it to help the players get better. And I think in volleyball, sometimes we stop, like we have all these volley metrics and data volley, and we have all these numbers. And now it's like, okay, well, now what?
What do we do with it?
Yeah, there's got to be an answer to the now what. And that, in essence, that becomes better ball in terms of, okay, you're throwing your fastball at 95 miles an hour. If you change your delivery, if you don't stride as far with that left foot when you're throwing, and they do video analysis and they work on the arm. So now they can throw a mile or two faster, or miles per hour faster. But it's because they worked on their technique. So in essence, that's within the context of this book, that was better ball. in terms of don't just stop with statistics. It's how can we use that to get better? And I use the example sometimes, well, we're not siding out at a high enough number in rotation 1. And it's like, well, why not? I think so many coaches, they say, well, we're not siding out in rotation 1. Let's practice rotation 1 more. Well, okay, maybe, but is it you're not siding out because, of the first touch, it's not good enough, and now we're out of system, and now my setter is having to set the ball to the left front too often. Well, my setter has bad footwork coming off the net, so now that becomes a problem. So there's all this subtext going on with why you're not siding out in rotation 1. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, to me, that's where coaches can get better in terms of kind of digging into the varying layers of the game. Well, we're not siding out in rotation 1, but it's not because my left side isn't very good. It's because my serve receive isn't very good. And not only that, the wrong person's passing more balls than they need to be passing. So let's move our pattern over this way. So this person's passing more and that person's passing. I mean, there's all these layers to getting better in rotation 1. And that's
how do you keep it simple enough for for example, you coach the national team. How do you keep it simple enough for you to be able to adapt to the speed of the game, to the power of the game, to understanding that technology, yes, is here to help us, but it's also like the application of things, what makes it complicated, what makes it simple? Like how do we use this information, Jim?
Yeah, I think a lot of, at least the way I approach it, I think a lot of the stuff that I'm thinking I don't have to transfer to players. I want to, like, I'm doing something for a reason, but I don't necessarily need to explain it to a player. It's just, okay, I want you starting over here. Or I'll explain it in a way that makes them feel good. Like sometimes if you say, well, you're not passing very good, go stand by that sideline. Well, that's one way to put it. Or you can say, man, you're our best hitter, and it's hard for the best hitter to also receive the most balls. Not impossible, but it's hard. So since you're our best hitter, we're going to have you put you in a situation where you're passing fewer balls. So you can phrase things in a way that you're still getting done what you want to get done, but you're not, doing a tap dance over the player's ego and making them feel bad.
Jim, but we didn't used to receive this type of feedback in the 80s and 90s. Like it was like task-oriented feedback, just like at home. You do it because I tell you to do it. That's the way that we were all raised, by the baby booming generation. So why has that changed? So I can see you turning things into a positive reinforcement as really important for us to develop players.
I think the changes have taken place off the volleyball court. How many times do you read articles about homework's no longer allowed?
Yes.
And kids are not allowed to fail. If they don't do the class project, you have to at least give them a 50. Well, they haven't done anything. Yeah.
I never got that. Never got that in high school, by the way.
Yeah. So I think the players that especially college coaches are getting, but also club coaches, they're coming from a background that's not as black and white. And there's less accountability for their own performance. So those are just landmines that I think coaches have to navigate, but they can't pretend they don't exist because they do exist. If you assign homework for volleyball, I want you to go and watch this video. Well, that's homework. Well, they don't even get that in school. So you're asking them to do.
How can you justify that if they're not allowed to have homework in school?
Yeah, you're asking them to do something that they're generally not only not being asked, they're discouraged from doing homework. So there's just a lot of stuff that goes into it now. And but that's where I think the good coach is able to navigate that successfully. They're not oblivious to it, but they can still stick to their high standards and make appropriate demands. And that's the art of coaching.
The question about that, do you think that intrinsic motivation has gone down a little bit with modern generations? How have you dealt with that in the youth national team now, and in high performance in general? What do you see?
Yeah, that's a different scenario. First of all, then it's a different scenario than clubs or colleges. First of all, with the youth national team, you're dealing with a higher level of athlete who they got there somehow, and some are extremely talented, some have worked hard, but you're dealing with a higher class of athlete and a higher motivation level than the norm. But that being said, they're still they don't walk in perfect. You have to deal with things at times. But the thing that I think is really different is they're in a situation for the first time in their lives where, one, they're not going to start. They've never not started.
So you have the best players of each club, basically.
Yeah,
Not being used to not being the best player.
They've never not came off the court. And part B of that is you're dealing in a scenario where they might get cut. So if someone's a knucklehead, you can just say, "You're out of here." And that's hard to do sometimes in college and club. It's harder anyway. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I have two questions about that. About high performance in general. What do you think makes it successful? And if you had total control, how would it look like? I'm curious because of the point of thinking about youth development in other countries, including my island of Puerto Rico. I want to learn about what you think. I have been involved with high performance for a couple of years as well. So I want to see what you see.
How much time do they put in Puerto Rico? Like if they're training for NORCECA or the zonal competition, how much practice time would they put in?
Not much, unfortunately, because most of our coaches have 2 or 3 jobs. Yeah. So they have to travel an hour to practice, during the week, and to a specific location. So I know that we, as an island, want to do more, but I think that our coaches sacrifice themselves a lot, having to, work in different places and, as in this case, high performance coaches.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, if I were a volleyball czar and if I could do something, I would do the very best I could to have the players play more internationally. Because as you know, the game internationally is different. And I think it's not different good, different bad, it's just different. And I think for players, I've had middle hitters on my team that have never served in a tournament. Somebody would come in, and all of a sudden I'm telling them, "Hey, you got to serve." And besides that, then you got to go to left back and play defense. It's like a double whammy to their world. So to get themselves in that situation, I think would be time well spent. And the other thing, and this is more from a coaching perspective, I think it really helped my coaching internationally, because you can't just automatically sub somebody out. Well, you're not very good at defense, I'm going to put somebody in back row for you. You can't.
Take subs.
You can't. You've got to get better at this thing, So it demands that the coach find a way that that person becomes a better defender, or they have to become a better passer or a better hitter, or else you need to get them off the court, because there's not this front row, back row subbing that can go on like in American universities or even in club for that matter. So
that's really interesting, Jim, that you're saying that we find solutions like these 15 subs. We have used them to find solutions in our players instead of developing one. This is I love that.
Well, actually, you're not finding solutions. You're just masking the problem.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
And I just think college volleyball would be well served to go from 15 to 8 or 9.
Yeah.
So, and I think that would, it always drives me crazy when you have this big point scorer that's capable of scoring in the back row too, and you take them off the floor, and I'm going, they can't score from the bench, you know. Put those point scorers on the floor. I would rather have them on the floor and work with them on their skills.
Interesting.
Than to take them off the floor.
Agree. Makes a lot of sense. I have another question about the national program. From the outside, it looks more, let's put it like Goldmer Square-ish than anything else. But you give me the impression that you have your own thing going on, or in terms of like you have principles, like specific things in your own teams. Tell me a little bit about how that works. Like, where do you see yourself? You know, I know, of course, that you're with Art of Coaching, but from the outside, it looks like very similar to GMS as Team USA. What do you think?
I approach it generally that there is no right or wrong way. You know, I've been to clinics where coaches say that is the wrong way to do whatever. And my attitude is it might be a different way, but it's not necessarily the wrong way. And and that's kind of how I approach it. I take things from whoever can make, if it makes sense to me, I'll use it. Like I have no problem with block drills.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problem with it because I think there's a time and a place for it. Do you do it all the time? Well, of course not. You know, that person's not going to become a better hitter with me tossing balls to them and them hitting against no block. But it does allow them to work on some specific aspects of their skill, which we kind of talked about earlier.
Right.
So I don't think it always has to be ball coming over the net, and we got to be playing. And
so it doesn't have to be random all the time. There has to be a mix or even a combination of block and random together.
Absolutely. I think if somebody is at different ends of the spectrum, I don't think those people are successful. I think the successful programs over the long term are the ones that blend it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on your team. You know, with the youth national team, we similar to Puerto Rico, we don't have a lot of time. So man, we got to get out. We got to be doing some 6-on-6 stuff here because we just have to do that. But I try to script it where we're playing 6-on-6, but that first ball is going to the left front hitter every time. So even though it's random, it's kind of controlled random.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of scripting, or every ball is served to number 12 over there. So we're playing, but number 12 is getting a lot of reps with her passing, which is what maybe the coach wants. So yeah. I think there's a way to combine all these philosophies, but I think it mandates that the coach has to be aware of all of it and then kind of pick and choose what applies to their particular situation.
I want to finish the conversation with saying this. Jim, I creeped in one of your trainings like a year and a half ago, and I stole one drill from you that I call it the Gemstone drill right now. And it was basically back row attackers attacking against all 6, but coming from a DS play. So setters are working on precision, they were working on the bigs, but at the same time with that element of random on the other side. So I think that exemplifies what you're talking about. And I just wanted to let you know that and share that with you. And just wanted to let you know that I appreciate what you do and have done, not just for USA, but for volleyball in general. I think that you have been a great educator on your own way. Continue to be a learner, which is something that inspires others to be the same way. Why is Jim Stone, a Hall of Fame coach, continuing to find ways to get better? And I think that shows us the importance of, of all the skills that we can acquire. Can we learn to learn? And can we continue to get better and improve our best? Because there's no limit when we are that way. So again, I want to thank you.
I appreciate your comments, and you're doing the same thing. You're creating a forum for people to gather different information, and it's much appreciated, and you're doing a wonderful job.
Gracias, Jim. You take care. Everyone, please visit Art of Coaching if you want more information. Please also like his Facebook page. I'm telling you, there's a lot of good stuff there that maybe you're gonna like and enjoy, and and continue to get better at. So again, that's Jim Stone for you. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. We'll be back Wednesday for anyone that wants to tune in. But Wednesday it will be in Spanish, I think. So. Again, thanks again for tuning in. We'll continue with this project. Everyone, go like our page, Volley Junkies, where we already have scheduled conversations with people from volleyball until mid-June. So please feel more than welcome to do so. Thanks again, everyone that is tuning in, and please stay healthy and safe. Jim, we're out. Does that?
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.